Hi, I'm Katie of Dandelion Doily. I love all things tiny and cute, and today I'm going to be sharing some of the tips and tricks that I've discovered after making some adorable small painted necklaces. This video will hopefully help you plan, paint, and finish your project by varnishing it. So first off, you need to start with the basics. Your project. What is it you are interested in making? Is it something wearable like a necklace or another type of jewelry? Or is it a small frame that could hang on the wall or the fridge? These are just a few ideas of the things that you could do with a tiny painting. Or you really don't have to do anything with it at all. For your project, you'll need to make sure that what you're painting is the accurate size for that end result. You'll need to figure out the perfect shape for your finished project. For instance, in my painted series, I had these oval bezels or pendant trays. Those are the search terms you can use on Etsy if you're interested in finding like a piece of jewelry. But a few years ago, I used to draw an oval and just guess and check by cutting it out and seeing if it fit accurately and well, just over and over, until I got a perfect shape that I could trace multiple times to make multiple paintings. You can just play around till something fits. That's kind of what I did. The other option is by using some technology. I actually have a paper cutter or a cutting machine, and so I created a template on my computer and was able to cut out the perfect size that I needed. But don't be discouraged if you don't have one of those. It just takes a little bit of extra effort and work, but you'll be able to get something that fits almost perfectly with your own scissors. Your choice of paper also matters. I recommend using something acid-free or even archival. If you don't know what those terms mean, I don't really either, but I do know that the gist of it is that it won't yellow over time or disintegrate. They're just higher quality paper that should last longer. It's important to have a good thickness to the paper so the paint doesn't seep into the paper too much, and for later on in the process when you're gluing, the glue doesn't mess up the paper in any way. So you just want a good thickness. The paper that I used is a cardstock. It was 110 pounds. That's kind of what the terminology is. It's not that heavy. If your bezel is deep, you can go with something even thicker than that, or you could glue two shapes together to make it thicker. Next, for your project, you'll need to think about composition. It's really easy to just jump past this step and just go straight into the work, and sometimes, to be honest, I do that. But I do think it sets you up for success just to practice and work out any weird kinks in the project and give you a better idea of how to proceed with your painting. I recommend doing a quick thumbnail sketch and practice drawing the main elements. I also recommend paying attention to value in your composition. Value, or the light and the dark of a composition, helps anyone who's visually looking at it determine what is going on. If the values are unclear or jumbled, so is the image. It doesn't make sense and it can't be registered, especially on such a small composition. Setup is super simple for miniature paintings. Painting always makes a little bit of a mess, but you don't need a ton of space and you barely use any paint. You'll want to have a palette, water cup, and napkin ready. I actually don't have a fancy painter's palette, and so what I use is just a plate. It helps if the plate is white though, so I use the back of a porcelain plate. You'll also want to make sure that your posture is comfortable. Working on tiny things, there can be this temptation to really hunch over and get close to your work. I've done it before and really I messed up my back. So the way I combat that is I've been painting on a thick notebook that brings the work a little closer to my level so I don't have to hunch over as much. And I've been gluing the small pieces of accurately sized paper. I've been gluing that to the notebook just lightly with a glue stick so that the paper doesn't move while I'm working on it, and then later it just peels right off. For tiny painting, at least for me, I don't think you need that many brushes. What I've been using mostly is kind of a larger squared brush to get some of the larger shapes down first. And then when it's time to add details, I've really enjoyed using a fine liner. For my tiny paintings, I've been using a paint that is acrylic called Gouache. I use Holbein gouache, and I only use like the primary colors plus black and white. I do, however, have kind of like more cool primary colors, and additionally some like warmer, more vibrant primary colors. They're not even really primary, they're more like CMYK type colors. Gouache is opaque, vibrant, and pretty forgiving. If you make a mistake, you can just go over it again with another layer. I stick with primary colors just because it's easy to make whatever you need. You just have to mix a little bit. And it also keeps the palette just simple and harmonious. I don't want to clutter my house with a bunch of paint, and it's just unnecessary. Another recommendation for tiny work is to avoid straight black, which is just black straight out of the tube. A lot of painters tend to mix black with other colors to make the darkest element of the painting for that value scale that I talked about. If you use just straight black, it's going to be very dominating, and it might kind of muddy your painting and make it kind of confusing what's going on. For my batch of miniature necklaces, I was depicting small scenes. And with scenes, it was really helpful to have references that I could look at to kind of help me determine what I wanted in the scene and how to break it up. So if you are making a scene, I recommend simplifying it. And one way to do that is by squinting and kind of determining what the main features or building blocks of your painting are. Start with large shapes and start with that larger brush and let the details come later. One part of tiny paintings, and probably just paintings of any size in general, in the middle it kind of will always look ugly because it's just getting somewhere. So don't let that discourage you. You have to push through the ugly to get to that finished, satisfying point. You'll also need to ask yourself while you're painting, what is working and what is not. This is where it's important to make choices. You need to keep it simple, but also add details that are important to you. Tiny paintings are like tiny puzzles, and your creative choices are the solution. So have fun with it, and don't overdo it though with details. It can be really tempting to add all of the details, but don't do it. Tiny painting kind of has like this sweet spot where it's either adorable or unreadable. If you go too small, things just kind of become noise. So you need to be kind of strategic and know when to back off from details and when to add them. Just a little bit will go far. And remember that gouache is forgiving, so if you do think you went too far, you can always just paint over it with a big stroke and try again. Once you've finished your painting, it's time to assemble it into jewelry or the finished product that you're making. For my projects, I've been gluing them into the pendant using E6000 glue. This is kind of like just a catch-all industrial strength like jewelry glue. I honestly don't think it's the best. It's not archival, and over time it could yellow or lose some of its tackiness. However, I have yet to find a better solution, so if you know of one, please let me know. Next comes varnishing. Usually when you finish a painting, you'll want to varnish it to protect it from aging and UV rays and all the elements. And the same goes for your tiny paintings, especially on jewelry when it's being worn. So for my projects, I tested out a few different varnishes. They all kind of gave different results, so depending on what you're looking for, any of these could work well. I used a paper glaze from Aleene's, which I was really hoping would be a good solution. It went on very opaque, and it was kind of scary to see if it would turn transparent, which it did. It also had quite a few little bubbles that would pop up that I would have to like urgently try to pop with a needle, and it did dry after like 24 hours. It seemed very protective, but it made the painting color kind of more saturated, and the painting kind of lost its painterly feel to me. I also tried a Sculpey glaze, which is meant for clay, but I read that it was also okay on paper. And I brushed it on, and you could kind of see the brush strokes, kind of like Mod Podge when you use that. And it was a bit glossy. It wasn't my favorite, but it was thinner than the paper glaze. And lastly, I tried a crystal clear acrylic coating, and that seemed to have the best effect. You could still tell that it was a painting. There wasn't too much glossiness that prevented you from seeing what the small image was. And I actually just sprayed the entire pendant because that coating is also actually okay to spray on jewelry to prevent it from tarnishing. So it was kind of a win-win. However, I do feel like it's a very thin coating, and it just makes me a little bit worried for that longevity. I just think if it was like all the way coated and thick, it would be more preserved, but then it just doesn't feel like a painting. So there was kind of some give and take with the varnishing. Another option that you could try is resin. Honestly, I'm still experimenting. There's no perfect solution, but that's part of the journey. Making miniature painted jewelry is equal parts craft and patience. It's about finding a balance between detail and simplicity, expression and control, tiny and readable. I hope these tips help you on your own little tiny painting adventure. If you enjoyed or found this video helpful, please leave a like. And if you have any tips for us, please leave it below in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Sincerely, Katie of Dandelion Doily.